What would you do if you found out your child had a secret that could change everything? The words echoed in my mind as I sat in the dimly lit living room of my apartment, the evening sky settling into a soft, dusky hue outside. I'd never expected my life to spiral the way it had. And yet, here I was, staring at the envelope in my hands, knowing that it held something that would change the course of everything. The world felt strangely still for a moment, suspended in time as I fought to steady my breathing. My hands trembled, and I could feel my heart racing. A secret. A secret from Ethan, my 8-year-old son. I glanced over at the clock. It was getting late. Ethan would be in bed by now, hopefully fast asleep, unaware of the storm that was brewing in our lives. Just a week ago, I had received a letter from my ex-husband, Ryan, demanding full custody of Ethan. The mere thought of losing him was enough to send waves of panic coursing through my veins. Ryan and I had been separated for almost 4 years now, our marriage falling apart under the weight of constant arguments and emotional neglect. After the divorce, I had fought tooth and nail to gain primary custody of Ethan. I was his mother, after all. I had always been there for him, and I would do anything to make sure he grew up in a safe and loving environment. But now, Ryan, who had spent so many years absent from Ethan's life, was suddenly pushing for full custody. I didn't know whether to be angry or terrified. How could he even think he could offer Ethan a better life than I could? My thoughts were interrupted as I looked down at the envelope in my hands again. The name on the front was written in Ethan's small handwriting, Mom. With a deep breath, I carefully peeled open the envelope, pulling out a folded sheet of paper. As I unfolded it, my eyes began scanning the neat, yet slightly uneven, letters. What I read made my heart stop. Dear Mom. I know things are hard right now, and I don't know what's going to happen with Dad and you, but I wanted to tell you something. I love you, Mom. I always have. And even though it's scary, I need you to know that I don't want to go live with Dad. I don't feel safe there, and I don't feel happy. I don't want to hurt your feelings, but this is how I feel. Please don't let him take me away. I don't want to leave you. Love, Ethan. Tears welled up in my eyes as I read the words again, my heart breaking for my son. Ethan had never been one to voice his emotions openly, especially when it came to things like this. He had always been quiet, a little reserved even, but I never thought he felt that way about Ryan. I hadn't known. How could I not have known? I placed the letter down on the coffee table, my hands trembling. The words felt like a punch to the gut. Ethan was scared. Scared of his own father. My mind raced with a million questions, and each one seemed to pile on top of the other. What had Ryan done to make Ethan feel this way? How had I not seen the signs? And more than anything, how could I protect him from this? As I sat there, feeling the weight of the letter, the realization hit me hard, I had to fight for Ethan, no matter what. I couldn't let Ryan take him away. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the battle ahead wasn't going to be easy. Ryan had already contacted a lawyer. He was serious about this, and it was clear he'd stop at nothing to gain custody of our son. The legal fight was going to be long, grueling, and emotionally exhausting. But what terrified me more than anything was the idea of Ethan being pulled from the only home he had known for the past several years. The life we had built together would be shattered if Ryan got what he wanted. I stood up, pacing around the room, running my hands through my hair in frustration. The letter. It was a lifeline, but it was also a curse. If I used it in court, it would open up a whole new can of worms. Would the judge see it as manipulation, or worse, as something fabricated to gain sympathy? Could I even risk it? A part of me knew that Ethan's words, his honest, raw feelings, would be enough to sway any reasonable person. But there was also a part of me that was terrified of what would happen if Ryan found out I had the letter. What if he turned it around and used it against me? I glanced over at Ethan's room, where I could hear the faint sound of his breathing from behind the door. He was my world. His happiness, his safety, his future, they meant everything to me. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let Ryan take him. I took a deep breath and walked over to the table, picking up the letter again. As I read through it one more time, a determination began to rise within me. Ethan's words weren't just a plea for help, they were a declaration of his love and trust in me. He believed in me. And I was going to fight for him with everything I had. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? I imagined myself saying these words in front of a crowd, trying to find comfort in the hypothetical. But there was no comfort here. This wasn't a story for an audience to consume, it was my reality. I wasn't about to let my son's voice be silenced. The next day, I contacted my lawyer, scheduling an emergency meeting to discuss the letter. The battle was just beginning, and I had no idea how far it would go or how much it would cost, emotionally and financially. But I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going down without a fight. And as I glanced back at the envelope on the table, I knew this was just the beginning of a much larger journey, one I never thought I'd have to take. But it was the journey I had to take to protect the one person who mattered most to me, Ethan. My name is Sarah Montgomery, and like most people, I never imagined my life would unfold the way it has. I'd always believed in love, in the fairy tale where everything works out in the end. But life had other plans. It wasn't always like this. I didn't grow up expecting a messy divorce, custody battles, or wondering every day if I was doing the right thing for my son. It was supposed to be different. But as I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the letter from Ethan, I realized how much my past had shaped the woman I'd become today. I thought back to my first love, Ryan. He was everything I wanted back then: charming, funny, and effortlessly good-looking. We met in college, and it felt like fate. We were inseparable, and soon after graduation, we were married. In the beginning, everything seemed perfect. We settled into a little apartment, got a dog, and dreamed of starting a family. It wasn't long before we found out we were expecting. Ethan came into our lives just a year after we got married. From that moment on, everything changed. Becoming a mother was the most overwhelming experience of my life. The love I felt for Ethan was instant, all-encompassing, and transformative. But with that love came the responsibility of being the best mother I could be. And as time went on, I realized Ryan wasn't as ready for fatherhood as I had hoped. I remember the late nights when Ethan was a newborn, crying endlessly, and I would call Ryan, desperate for help. He'd come home from work, tired, and I'd ask him to step in, to take over for just a moment. But more often than not, Ryan would retreat into his own world, leaving me to handle everything. At first, I told myself it was just a phase, that he was overwhelmed too. But months turned into years, and Ryan's indifference grew. He became emotionally distant, absent from the moments that truly mattered. I was left to do everything: work, take care of Ethan, maintain our home. My life revolved around Ethan's needs, and Ryan was just there. It wasn't long before the tension between us became unbearable. I began to question if this marriage was ever truly what I had thought it was. I felt like I was carrying the weight of our family, while Ryan had retreated into his own life. It was as though we were living separate lives under the same roof. I tried to talk to him, to understand where we had gone wrong, but each conversation only led to more arguments, more silence. I couldn't do it anymore. Ethan was growing up, and I wanted him to see that love and respect were the foundation of any relationship. It was clear to me that Ryan and I no longer had that. The divorce was inevitable. The custody battle was where the real pain began. Ryan wasn't willing to let go of what he thought was his. He demanded joint custody, then tried to push for full custody, claiming that he could provide a better life for Ethan. I couldn't understand it. He hadn't been a present father for years, and now he thought he could just step in and take my son away from me. The hardest part of it all was Ethan. He was caught in the middle of a war that wasn't his to fight. When we split, he was too young to understand. But over the years, he began to see the cracks in the situation. He knew things weren't perfect between his dad and me. He knew the arguments, the tension, and the sadness that hung in the air whenever Ryan came around. It wasn't until that fateful day when Ryan made his latest move, demanding full custody, that I realized how much Ethan had been carrying with him. The letter, the one I'd just read, was proof of the pain he had been hiding. I had always tried to shield him from the harsh realities of the divorce. I wanted him to feel safe, loved, and secure. But I was fooling myself. Ethan had always been perceptive, even when he was younger. He knew more than I had realized. He saw the tension, the unspoken words, the hurt that lingered in the air. Reading his letter, it was as if a veil had been lifted. My heart broke for him. He was just a little boy, and yet, he was carrying the weight of so much. He was scared, and he didn't know how to express it. He wasn't asking for pity, he was asking for reassurance, for a guarantee that I would always be there for him. The guilt hit me like a freight train. Had I been so wrapped up in my own pain that I had missed the signs? Had I been so focused on the custody battle, on protecting my own rights as a mother, that I had overlooked what Ethan truly needed? I took a deep breath and tried to center myself. I needed to be strong, for Ethan. I needed to set aside my own fears and focus on what mattered, protecting my son, making sure he was safe, happy, and knew that I would never abandon him. Ryan had his own reasons for wanting full custody. Maybe he wanted to prove something to himself, maybe he thought Ethan would be a pawn in his personal game, or maybe, just maybe, he thought he could be a better parent now. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that Ethan felt secure. What mattered was that he felt loved. And that was something Ryan couldn't give him, not after all this time. I walked over to the bookshelf and picked up a photo of Ethan and me. It was taken on his 6th birthday, when he blew out the candles on his cake and made a wish. I hadn't thought about that moment in a long time. Ethan's smile was so genuine, so full of joy. It was that moment I had to hold on to. It was that moment I had to fight for. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed help. I needed a plan. And I needed to make sure Ethan knew that, no matter what, I would always be there for him. With a sense of resolve, I grabbed my phone and called my lawyer. The battle was far from over, but now I had a new strength. Ethan's letter had changed everything. It had given me the clarity I needed. I wasn't just fighting for custody, I was fighting for my son's happiness, his future, and his peace of mind. As I sat there, waiting for the call to connect, I couldn't help but wonder, how much longer could I keep this secret? Ryan might not know about the letter, but it wouldn't be long before everything came to light. And when it did, I would be ready. The days after reading Ethan's letter felt like I was walking through a fog, trying to keep my footing as the world around me seemed to be crumbling. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's handwriting again. I heard his words echoing in my mind, I don't feel safe there, and I don't feel happy. The weight of that statement pressed on my chest, leaving me breathless. I tried to keep things normal for Ethan. I didn't want him to see how badly I was struggling with the custody battle or the emotional weight of his letter. I wanted to protect him from all of it, especially from Ryan. Ryan had always been unpredictable, and now, with his demand for full custody, he was pushing harder than ever before. He hadn't made any direct threats yet, but I could feel the tension building. He was determined to get what he wanted, and nothing would stop him. It didn't matter that he hadn't been a consistent presence in Ethan's life for years. It didn't matter that Ethan barely knew him as more than a distant figure. All that mattered to Ryan was winning. Winning the custody battle. Winning Ethan's love and loyalty. Winning a sense of control over the situation. I had my own lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Jessica who had been helping me since the separation. She was strong, calm, and methodical, everything I needed in this mess. But no matter how many consultations we had, no matter how many times we discussed strategy, I couldn't shake the feeling that the outcome was beyond my control. We had our first court meeting scheduled for the following week. The paperwork had been filed, the motions had been made, and the stage was set. I had no idea what to expect. My lawyer assured me that the evidence would be on our side, but there was always the lingering fear that the court might see things differently. That somehow, Ryan's charm or his wealth or his reputation could win him sympathy. But then, just as I was preparing myself for what I feared might be an uphill battle, I got an unexpected call from Jessica. "Sarah," she began, her voice tense but calm, "I just got off the phone with Ryan's lawyer. It's not looking good." My heart dropped into my stomach. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep the panic from seeping into my voice. "It seems like Ryan is planning to request a psychological evaluation for Ethan. He's claiming that Ethan's attachment to you is unhealthy, that you've been alienating him from his father." I felt my world tilt on its axis. The thought of Ryan accusing me of alienating Ethan, it was so absurd that it left me momentarily speechless. "Isn't that the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard?" I said, trying to keep the disbelief out of my voice. "Ridiculous or not, it's a tactic they're using to undermine your bond with Ethan," Jessica explained. "If they can get a psychologist to say that you're somehow damaging Ethan's relationship with his father, it could have a huge impact on the custody hearing." My mind raced. This was a low blow, but it was exactly the kind of move I should have expected from Ryan. He wasn't above using anything to get his way, even if it meant twisting the truth. The idea that I had been alienating Ethan from him was laughable. Ethan was my world. I had never once tried to keep Ryan away from him. But in Ryan's eyes, everything that didn't go his way was a form of betrayal. "I'm not going to let him do this, Jessica," I said, my voice firm, though my heart was pounding. "This is ridiculous." "We'll fight it," she replied, her voice determined. "But we need to prepare for the possibility. I'm going to file a motion against it, but we might need to gather more documentation to prove that your relationship with Ethan is healthy and that his attachment to you isn't a result of any manipulation." I nodded, but I felt the cold knot of fear tighten in my chest. This was just the beginning. I had to be strong. For Ethan. But how could I fight against such an underhanded attack? That night, after the call ended, I sat in the living room, staring at the empty space around me. Ethan had gone to bed, and the silence of the house felt oppressive. How had everything gotten so complicated? All I wanted was to protect my son, to ensure that he grew up in a stable, loving environment. But now, Ryan was playing dirty, using whatever he could to tear apart the foundation of our family. He wanted to win. And I wasn't sure how far he was willing to go. I looked at the photo of Ethan and me on the mantel. It was a picture of us at the park, the two of us laughing as we swung together on the jungle gym. That was the Ethan I knew, the one who still looked at the world with wonder and excitement. That was the boy I needed to protect. But how? How could I keep him safe from Ryan's manipulation and lies? The answer was simple: I had to fight. The next morning, I woke up with a new resolve. I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to let Ryan tear my family apart. I needed to get stronger. I needed to be smarter. I needed to show the court the truth, what Ryan was trying to do, how he was manipulating the situation for his own gain. Ethan needed me. And I wasn't about to fail him. I called Jessica again, outlining everything I was planning to do to gather the evidence we needed for the upcoming hearing. We needed proof of the bond Ethan and I shared, proof that Ryan had been an absent father, and we needed to discredit the psychological evaluation claim. And then, I remembered something important. Ethan's letter. That letter, his words, could be the key. It was evidence that Ethan was aware of the emotional toll Ryan's absence had caused. It was a letter written from his heart, a cry for help. I couldn't let that letter be buried or ignored. It had to be part of the fight. With newfound determination, I set to work. The battle had begun in earnest, and there was no turning back now. The following days felt like a whirlwind of emotions. Every conversation with Jessica made it more evident that Ryan wasn't going to back down. If anything, his demands were becoming more relentless and bitter. The custody battle had already become a war of attrition, where every victory seemed fleeting and every setback felt like a punch to the gut. I knew I needed to focus on what mattered, but it was hard to ignore the feeling of dread that hung in the air. The court date was approaching, and the pressure was mounting. I couldn't stop thinking about Ethan's letter. The weight of his words had taken on a deeper meaning with each passing day. It wasn't just a child's plea for safety, it was a revelation. Ethan didn't feel secure, and that broke my heart. I needed to protect him, but now, I realized I also had to prove that Ryan wasn't the father he claimed to be. Ryan's lawyer had gone to great lengths to create a narrative. They painted me as an overprotective, paranoid mother who was preventing Ryan from being a part of Ethan's life. The claims were baseless, but it didn't matter. In court, perception was just as powerful as truth. If I didn't have the right evidence, I could lose my son. My head spun. I spent sleepless nights sorting through old photos, messages, and school reports, anything that could show Ryan's absence, his lack of involvement in Ethan's life. But every time I looked at Ethan's face, his innocent, trusting eyes, I was reminded that it wasn't just about legal strategy. It was about him. It was about Ethan's well-being. His peace of mind. And then came the moment I had been dreading, the first day in court. The courtroom was cold, sterile, almost like a place designed to drain you of hope. The walls were pale, and the hard wooden chairs were filled with tense faces, all waiting for the proceedings to begin. Ryan sat across the room with his lawyer, his face unreadable. He hadn't said a word to me since the last time we'd spoken outside of our lawyer meetings, but I could feel the hostility radiating from him. I sat at the other table, my stomach in knots. Jessica was by my side, flipping through the documents in front of her, preparing for the fight of our lives. I could feel her energy, focused and steady, and it gave me a bit of strength. But nothing could calm the storm brewing inside me. My mind kept drifting back to Ethan. He was at school, completely unaware of what was happening, of the battle that had become his reality. He didn't deserve this. No child should ever have to choose between their parents. I couldn't help but wonder how Ryan could do this to him. How could he want to take Ethan away from me, after everything? I was the one who had stayed up all night when Ethan was sick. I was the one who had sat through parent-teacher conferences, who had comforted him when his friends betrayed him, who had celebrated his every small victory. And yet, Ryan, who had been absent for years, thought he could just waltz in and take my place. As I looked at Ryan across the room, I suddenly felt a sharp, unfamiliar sense of clarity. I wasn't just fighting for my rights as a mother. I was fighting for my son's future. For his peace, his happiness, and his sense of security. The judge entered the courtroom, and everyone stood. The proceedings began. Jessica spoke first, outlining the facts. She was concise and effective, painting a picture of Ryan's absence and lack of involvement in Ethan's life. She spoke about how Ryan had been distant, how his work and his personal life had kept him from being a constant figure for Ethan. She made it clear that Ethan's emotional well-being depended on his continued bond with me, his primary caregiver. Ryan's lawyer countered, of course. They painted me as an overbearing, controlling mother who was trying to alienate Ethan from his father. They brought up the claim of parental alienation, arguing that I was manipulating Ethan and preventing him from developing a healthy relationship with Ryan. The words cut through me like a knife. I could feel the tears burning in my eyes, but I kept them at bay. The last thing I needed was to break down in front of everyone. I had to stay strong, for Ethan. Ryan stood up next, giving a polished and practiced speech about how he had made changes in his life. He spoke about his new job, his new home, and how he was prepared to offer Ethan a stable life. His voice was calm, measured, almost rehearsed. I watched him, trying to reconcile the man standing before me with the man who had left us so many times, who had abandoned Ethan and me in our darkest hours. But he was convincing. Too convincing. For a moment, I wondered if the judge would believe him. Then, it was my turn. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling like jelly, but I forced myself to be steady. I started with the facts, just like Jessica had shown me. I spoke about the nights I spent caring for Ethan, the endless hours of listening to his fears and comforting him when things got tough. I told the court about the countless times I had worked 2 jobs just to give Ethan the life he deserved, the sacrifices I had made to give him stability, and the love I had poured into his every moment. But then, I hesitated. I knew that the truth wasn't just in the facts. It was in the heart. And so, I spoke from my heart. I told them about Ethan's letter, the letter he had written, hiding his pain, his fears. I told the court how Ethan had expressed his fear of living with his father, how he felt unsafe and unprotected in Ryan's world. I didn't go into details, but I could see the judge's eyes narrow as I spoke. I handed over the letter. It wasn't much, just a few scribbled lines, but it was enough. Ryan's lawyer stood up in protest, but it didn't matter. The truth was in that letter, and the truth was undeniable. The day was long, the tension rising with each moment. When the hearing finally ended, the judge told us to return the following week for a decision. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt a sense of relief mixed with dread. The battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a fighting chance. And as I drove home, a single thought echoed in my mind: would never let Ryan take Ethan from me. Not now, not ever. The days after the court hearing were a blur. I couldn't focus on much except the looming dread of waiting for the judge's decision. It felt like I was trapped in this never-ending cycle of hope and fear. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart raced, thinking it was an update, but it was never the news I was hoping for. Ethan, of course, had no idea what was going on. I made sure of it. He had been his usual self, bouncing between school and playdates, laughing and running around like a kid should. I couldn't let him see the weight of what was happening. He didn't need to worry about his future. I would take care of that. But deep down, I knew that this was bigger than anything either of us had ever faced. I had never imagined Ryan would go this far to take Ethan from me. The more I thought about it, the more it sickened me. This was a fight for control, a power struggle that had very little to do with Ethan's best interests and everything to do with Ryan's ego. But no matter how much he fought, I wasn't going to lose. The call came on Thursday morning. I had just finished making breakfast for Ethan when my phone rang. My heart skipped a beat as I saw Jessica's name on the screen. "Sarah," she said, her voice sharp, "we need to talk." My pulse quickened. "Did the judge make a decision?" I asked, barely able to keep my voice steady. There was a pause before Jessica responded. "Yes, but I need to warn you, there's something unexpected that came up." I felt a knot form in my stomach. "What do you mean?" "You're not going to like this, but it seems Ryan has presented new evidence. And it's a game changer." I could barely breathe. "What new evidence?" Jessica sighed. "He's claiming that Ethan is exhibiting signs of emotional distress, and he's produced a series of reports from his own psychologist. They're claiming that Ethan needs a more stable, structured environment. Something he argues you're unable to provide due to your overbearing nature." I felt a wave of anger rise within me. "That's not true," I shouted, before quickly lowering my voice. "How can they even use that? They've never seen Ethan's life with me. They've never been involved in his day-to-day." "I know," Jessica replied softly. "But the problem is the reports. They're compelling. And Ryan's lawyer is trying to use them to paint a picture that you're unstable and that Ethan is under stress because of the custody situation. It's an attack on your character, and it's not something we can ignore." I sank onto the couch, my head spinning. I had worked so hard to keep things together for Ethan. I had given everything I had to make sure his life was stable and loving. The idea that Ryan could use these reports to twist the narrative of our family made my blood boil. So what do we do now? I asked, my voice shaky. We'll fight it, Jessica said firmly. But we need to prepare for the worst. This is serious, Sarah. We have to show that these claims are baseless and that Ethan is emotionally secure with you. We can't let Ryan manipulate the court like this. I didn't want to hear the word worst. But I had to be realistic. This was exactly the kind of battle Ryan had been preparing for. He was playing dirty, and he had a plan. The only question now was if I could stay ahead of him. The next few days were a blur of meetings, paperwork, and phone calls. I had to gather every piece of evidence I could to prove Ryan's claims were false. I reached out to Ethan's teachers, his friends' parents, anyone who had seen Ethan day in and day out and could vouch for the stability and love in our home. But the more I dug into the evidence, the more it felt like I was up against a wall. Ryan's new psychologist had created a narrative that seemed to fit perfectly with the picture Ryan wanted to paint. They had framed Ethan's behavior as signs of neglect and emotional distress. But none of it reflected the reality of our lives. Ethan had his moments of frustration, what kid didn't, but it wasn't because of me or anything I had done. I had been the one to pick him up when he fell. I had been the one to hold him through every nightmare. I had been the one who had spent countless hours trying to make him feel safe and loved. Still, I couldn't ignore the fact that this new evidence was throwing me off balance. The weight of Ryan's lawyer's accusations made my stomach churn. Was I really going to have to go up against a psychologist's report that made Ethan's life sound like a ticking time bomb? I spent that night in a haze, barely sleeping as the thoughts swirled through my head. I stared at the ceiling, wondering how Ryan had managed to turn this whole situation into something so complex and difficult. He was playing a game I didn't know the rules to, and I was terrified that he was winning. The next morning, as I drove Ethan to school, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He was unusually quiet in the car, staring out the window. When I glanced over at him, I saw that his eyes were heavy, as though he hadn't slept well either. Ethan, honey, what's wrong? I asked, my voice soft. He hesitated, then turned to face me. Mom. I don't want to go to Dad's this weekend, he said quietly. My heart sank. It wasn't the first time Ethan had expressed reluctance about going to Ryan's, but this time, there was something different in his tone. He sounded scared. Why, sweetie? I asked gently, trying to keep my voice steady. I just don't feel okay there, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I don't feel like it's home. Tears welled up in my eyes. I had always suspected that Ethan wasn't comfortable with Ryan, but hearing it in his own words made it so much more real. I understand, I said softly. You know I'm here for you. Always. Ethan nodded, his small hand reaching over to squeeze mine. We didn't say anything else for the rest of the drive, but the moment stuck with me. As soon as I dropped him off at school, I called Jessica again, my voice shaky. Ethan just told me he doesn't want to go to Ryan's this weekend, I said. He's scared. Jessica's voice was calm but urgent. Sarah, this could be important. We need to make sure we document everything. Every sign of distress, every moment that shows how this is affecting Ethan. We need to use everything we can to fight back. I'm not going to lose him, I whispered, the words carrying more weight than I had expected. You won't, Jessica reassured me. We're not giving up. Not now. Not ever. As I hung up the phone, I knew that this battle was far from over. But one thing had become clear, I wasn't fighting just for myself anymore. I was fighting for Ethan. And I would do whatever it took to protect him. The following week dragged on, each day feeling like an eternity. Every moment I spent worrying about the case was another moment I couldn't spend with Ethan. But the truth was, the weight of what was happening to our family was becoming almost unbearable. I couldn't escape the feeling that the walls were closing in on me. Ethan had been quieter than usual, still processing everything, I assumed. He was withdrawn, his playful nature replaced by a somber quietness that weighed heavily on me. I tried to comfort him, but every time I looked at him, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He wasn't just nervous about the upcoming weekends with Ryan, he was afraid. I could see it in his eyes. He didn't want to say it out loud, but it was there, a fear I hadn't fully acknowledged before. I had no doubt that Ryan had manipulated the situation to his advantage. And now, it felt like the entire world was conspiring against me. Every step I took in preparation for the next court hearing only seemed to make things worse. With each new development, it felt like we were losing ground. The reports from Ryan's psychologist seemed airtight, and no matter how much evidence I provided to the contrary, it felt like the deck was stacked against me. It was the night before the next court hearing when everything seemed to come crashing down. Ethan had asked me to read to him before bed, something we hadn't done in a while. He climbed into his bed and snuggled under the covers, holding his favorite stuffed animal, a worn-out bear that had been with him since he was a baby. His fingers played nervously with the edges of the blanket, and I could tell he was still carrying that heavy weight of anxiety. "Mom, can we just talk for a minute?" Ethan's voice was small, barely above a whisper. "Of course, honey," I said, setting the book aside and leaning in closer. "What's on your mind?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting around the room before locking onto mine. "I don't want to go back to Dad's," he said again, his voice shaking slightly. I sighed, gently brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "I know, sweetie. But we've talked about this. You know you have to, right? It's part of what the court decided." "I don't care about the court," he said suddenly, his eyes filling with tears. "I don't want to go because it's not safe. It's not home, and I feel like I'm trapped when I'm there." My heart stopped. I wanted to say something, to reassure him, but the words caught in my throat. How could I explain to him that I couldn't just fix this? That I was doing everything in my power, but it might not be enough? "Ethan, I'm so sorry," I whispered, trying to hold back my own tears. "I'm doing everything I can to protect you. But I need you to know that I'm here, always. We're going to get through this, I promise." He nodded, but the worry on his face didn't fade. He wasn't convinced. And neither was I. That night, after I tucked him in and kissed him goodnight, I sat alone in the living room, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I couldn't help but replay his words over and over in my mind. He didn't feel safe. How had it come to this? Ryan's claims about Ethan's emotional distress were ringing in my ears. Was Ethan truly being affected by this? Was it possible that the man who once vowed to protect him was now the one making him feel unsafe? I thought about the psychologist's report. Ryan's lawyer had done a masterful job of manipulating the situation. They painted me as an unstable mother, too emotionally involved in Ethan's life. It was a stark contrast to the image Ryan was trying to create, a new, improved father who could provide a stable, structured home. I was caught in a nightmare where no matter how hard I fought, it seemed like the world was ready to hand Ethan over to a man who had abandoned him for years. The next day was the court hearing. I had prepared myself, but it felt like I was walking into a battle I had no hope of winning. Jessica and I went over everything one last time in the car before heading inside. She was trying to reassure me, but the look in her eyes told me she was just as anxious as I was. We entered the courtroom, and I felt the chill of the room immediately. The judge, a stern woman with short, graying hair, sat at the front of the room. Ryan sat across from me with his lawyer, both of them appearing calm, collected, and confident. Jessica leaned over to me. "Remember, we have to keep it together. We're going to focus on what's best for Ethan. The judge will see the truth." But as the hearing began, I started to feel the crushing weight of the situation. Ryan's lawyer was smooth, methodical, and made me feel like I was being judged for every little thing I had ever done. Every time they questioned me, I felt like I was on trial for being a mother. They painted me as erratic, controlling, and unable to provide the stable environment Ethan needed. They even went as far as to call me overly emotional during these proceedings. Every word felt like a dagger, each one sinking deeper into my heart. And when it was Ryan's turn to speak, he talked about his deep concern for Ethan. He told the court that Ethan was suffering emotionally because of me, that I had been alienating him from his father, and that Ethan needed a change of environment. The worst part was when Ryan's lawyer submitted the psychologist's report as evidence. The room felt like it was spinning as they read the claims aloud. They said Ethan was showing symptoms of severe emotional distress due to an unstable home life, with signs of manipulation from me. I couldn't breathe. The world around me faded as I tried to make sense of what was happening. How could they say this about me? How could they paint me as someone who was causing my son harm when all I had ever done was love him with everything I had? Finally, it was my turn. I stood up, but I felt like I was walking in a fog. My hands shook, but I kept my voice steady. I spoke about Ethan's life with me, the care I had given him, the love, the support. I talked about the stability I had worked so hard to provide, despite all the obstacles in my own life. But I also talked about Ethan's fears. I had to speak the truth, about how my son had expressed feeling unsafe with Ryan. I handed over the letter Ethan had written. The room was silent as the judge read it. But even as I said those words, a part of me wondered if it was enough. Could I prove that Ryan was the one who had failed him? Could I convince the court that my son's future should not be decided by a psychologist who had never met him, by a man who had abandoned him? The judge adjourned the hearing and told us to return in a week for the final decision. I left the courtroom with my heart heavy, knowing that nothing was certain. The battle had only just begun, and the stakes were higher than ever. As I walked out, I looked up at the sky. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, but I made myself a promise. I would not let Ryan take Ethan from me. Not now. Not ever. The days following the hearing were a blur. I barely slept, consumed by the uncertainty of what would happen next. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's face, his small, trembling hands holding onto mine, pleading for reassurance I didn't know how to give. But amidst all the chaos, there was one moment that stood out like a flicker of light in the dark. It wasn't much, but it gave me the strength to keep going. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I had taken Ethan to the park, hoping the fresh air and space to run around would lift his spirits. The park was relatively quiet, the sun casting long shadows on the grass as Ethan ran ahead of me, his laughter ringing in the air. For a moment, I let myself relax, watching him play. He seemed to be getting back to his usual self, at least for the moment. But deep down, I knew that the storm was still looming. As Ethan darted around, I sat down on a nearby bench, my mind racing. That's when I saw it, a familiar face approaching. It was Jenny, one of Ethan's old classmates, and her mother, Amanda. They had been a part of our lives for years. Jenny was a sweet girl, the kind of friend Ethan had always gotten along with. I hadn't seen Amanda in a while, but I recognized her instantly. "Sarah, hey." Amanda called as she waved and walked over to me. Her face was warm and friendly, as always, but there was something in her eyes, a mixture of sympathy and concern, that made me pause. "Hi, Amanda," I said, trying to muster a smile. "How's Jenny?" "She's good, just keeping busy with school," Amanda replied, taking a seat next to me on the bench. She looked at Ethan, then back at me. "How are you holding up? I've been hearing some things about the custody battle." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the conversation already settling in my chest. "I'm hanging in there. It's been tough." Amanda gave me a long, meaningful look. "I can only imagine," she said quietly. "I don't know if you know this, but Ethan's teachers have been talking about how much the custody situation is affecting him." I don't mean to interfere, but I think they might be able to offer some support. You know, something that could help show the judge how this is impacting him at school." I blinked, surprised. "The teachers?" I asked, my voice soft with disbelief. "What do you mean?" "Well, I've heard from a few of them, especially Mrs. Dorman, Ethan's homeroom teacher, that they're really concerned. Ethan's been quieter in class, more withdrawn. They don't think it's just a phase. They think this custody battle is really affecting him emotionally. If you need it, I'm sure they'd be willing to write letters to the court about how it's been affecting him." A wave of relief washed over me. For the first time in what felt like weeks, I felt a small flicker of hope. I hadn't realized how much Ethan's teachers had been paying attention to him. They had seen his struggles firsthand and were willing to help us in any way they could. This could be the key I needed to prove that the situation with Ryan wasn't as simple as he and his lawyer had been making it out to be. "That would mean the world to me, Amanda," I said, my voice trembling slightly with gratitude. "I didn't know they felt that way. I'll reach out to Mrs. Dorman right away." Amanda smiled softly. "I'm happy to help in any way I can. I know how hard this must be for you. Just don't forget, you're not alone in this." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. It wasn't just the support from the teachers that had moved me. It was the reminder that, despite everything, there were people who still saw me as a strong mother, someone who was doing everything for her child. People who believed in me. As we spoke more, I found myself feeling lighter, more optimistic than I had in days. But even as I embraced the moment of relief, I knew the battle wasn't over. I still had a long way to go. But now, at least, I had a few more allies on my side. That evening, after putting Ethan to bed, I sat down at my kitchen table and began drafting an email to Mrs. Dorman. I explained everything, about the custody battle, about the emotional toll it was taking on Ethan, and about the possible support she could provide. Within an hour, I had a response. Mrs. Dorman wrote that she had noticed the change in Ethan's demeanor over the past few months, especially since the court proceedings began. She expressed her concern for his emotional well-being and said that she would be more than willing to write a statement for the court. I felt a wave of relief as I read her words. Finally, there was some concrete support that would show just how deeply the situation was affecting Ethan. The next day, Jessica called me with an update. "Sarah, I've been going over the case again, and I think we're making progress," she said, her voice steady but with a note of optimism that I hadn't heard from her in a while. "The teacher support could really tip things in your favor. We're also looking into getting a child psychologist involved, someone who can assess Ethan and give an independent evaluation of his emotional state." I let out a long breath, feeling the tension in my shoulders start to ease. I can't believe this is really happening. After everything Ryan has done, now we have people who can testify about how this has been affecting Ethan. Jessica smiled. "That's right. We're not just relying on your word or Ryan's word anymore. We have independent professionals who can provide an objective perspective. The tide's turning, Sarah. It's not over yet, but I think we're heading in the right direction." I let myself smile for the first time in days. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time, I felt like we might actually have a chance. The days leading up to the final court hearing were a whirlwind of activity. We gathered letters from teachers, arranged for a psychologist to assess Ethan, and continued to build our case. Each step felt like a small victory, but the pressure never let up. Still, through it all, I kept my focus on what mattered most, Ethan. The morning of the final hearing arrived, and for the first time since this nightmare had begun, I felt a strange sense of calm. The weight of the past few months was still there, but there was something different today. I had fought for my son, and now it was time to let the truth speak for itself. I knew what was at stake. But more importantly, I knew that no matter the outcome, I would never stop fighting for Ethan. I would never stop being the mother he needed, the one who had always been there for him, no matter what. The air in the courtroom felt heavier than I had ever remembered. The morning sun poured in through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors, but it did nothing to warm the coldness in the room. Every time the judge entered or someone spoke, the echo of their footsteps and voices seemed to magnify the tension. My stomach churned with nerves, and I found myself struggling to steady my breath. This was it, the final hearing. The moment that would determine Ethan's future. Jessica was sitting beside me, her hand resting gently on mine. "We've done everything we can, Sarah," she whispered, her voice reassuring but not without the faintest tremor of uncertainty. "This is in the hands of the judge now. You've given everything you've got. Stay strong." I nodded, trying to swallow the knot of fear lodged in my throat. I had been strong, but the closer we got to the moment of truth, the harder it became. Everything depended on this hearing. Ethan's fate was being decided today. The weight of that responsibility was suffocating. The courtroom slowly filled with others, the lawyers, the judge, and various professionals who had been involved in the case. Ryan walked in with his lawyer, both of them looking calm and collected, as though they already knew the outcome. The man who once promised to stand by us had now become the source of our greatest pain. It still felt surreal, like some twisted nightmare I couldn't wake up from. He walked past me, not even sparing a glance, his face stoic, unreadable. I tried not to let it affect me, but it did. The coldness in his eyes, the calculated indifference, reminded me of the man who had disappeared from our lives for so many years. The man who now wanted full custody of our son. The man who didn't know Ethan at all. As the proceedings began, I couldn't help but feel the tension in the air. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes and an unflinching demeanor, looked at both of us carefully. Her eyes moved from Ryan to me, then to the pile of paperwork before her. I felt her gaze, but I couldn't decipher her thoughts. Ryan's lawyer spoke first, going over the same claims they had made in the previous hearings, how Ethan was allegedly emotionally distressed because of my unstable home life, how I had been alienating Ryan from him, and how a change in environment was necessary for Ethan's well-being. The lawyer was smooth, their words carefully chosen to paint me as the villain, the one who had been causing Ethan harm. Each statement felt like a knife to my chest, but I stayed composed. I could not break down now. Not when everything was on the line. Then, it was my turn. I stood, took a deep breath, and turned to face the judge, trying to steady the shaking in my hands. I had to be clear, calm, and above all, honest. "I'm here today because I believe, with all my heart, that I'm the best person to care for my son," I began, my voice steady despite the nervousness that threatened to overwhelm me. "Ethan is the most important thing in my life. I've done everything I can to provide him with love, stability, and support, despite the challenges I've faced. And I'm not perfect. I know I've made mistakes, but every decision I've made has been with Ethan's best interests in mind." I paused, my eyes scanning the courtroom, but I kept my gaze steady on the judge. I needed to be real, to let her see the truth of what was at stake. I know that the court has heard a lot about me. My emotional state, my actions, the way I've handled this situation. But I'm not the one causing harm to my son. Ethan is scared. He's scared because he doesn't want to leave me, because he doesn't feel safe in his father's home. He doesn't feel heard. I want to protect him from that fear. I want to give him the stability he needs to grow, to thrive, to feel safe. I could feel my throat tightening as I spoke, but I refused to let the tears fall. This wasn't about me. This was about Ethan. The teachers at his school have noticed the changes in him, the withdrawal, the sadness. They've all offered to testify on his behalf, to show that the custody battle is taking a toll on him. And I'm asking the court to consider his feelings. He's a child. He shouldn't have to go through this. But he is. And it breaks my heart that, despite everything, he has to continue living with this fear. I let my words sink in, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the smallest spark of hope. For all the attempts to undermine me, I was telling the truth. And the truth mattered. The judge listened intently, not interrupting, her expression unreadable. When I finished speaking, I took my seat and let out a shaky breath. It felt like the room had grown even quieter, the silence stretching out as everyone waited for the next steps. Ryan's lawyer spoke again, reiterating the need for a change in custody. But this time, I didn't hear the words as much as I felt the weight of them. They were trying to make me seem like an unfit mother. They were trying to twist the narrative, to take Ethan from me. And I wasn't going to let that happen. Not without a fight. Next, it was time for the psychologist's testimony. Dr. Fields, the child psychologist we had hired, took the stand and spoke calmly and professionally about the evaluation she had conducted on Ethan. She explained that while Ethan had shown signs of distress, her assessment showed no conclusive evidence that I was responsible for any emotional harm. Instead, she had observed that Ethan's anxiety was directly linked to the constant upheaval and uncertainty caused by the ongoing custody battle. Her words were a lifeline. They were the validation I had needed, proof that Ethan wasn't just acting out for no reason. His fear and distress were real, and they were rooted in the conflict he was caught in. The psychologist's report painted a clear picture of the emotional strain he had been under, and for the first time, I saw a shift in the judge's demeanor. As the hearing wrapped up, I sat back in my chair, exhausted but resolute. The judge adjourned the session for the day, telling us that she would make her decision in a week. I left the courtroom feeling like I had fought the hardest battle of my life. But there was no certainty yet. The next week felt like an eternity. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, and every time I looked at Ethan, I felt a mix of fear and hope. What would the judge decide? Would she see the truth? Would she see me as the mother I had always been? The one who would sacrifice everything for her son? All I could do now was wait. And pray. The week between the final hearing and the judge's decision felt like an eternity. Every minute dragged on, each second filled with uncertainty. I found myself replaying every detail of the case in my mind, questioning whether I had done enough, whether I had presented Ethan's needs and my own capabilities as a mother clearly enough. I spent every night wide awake, unable to silence the thoughts swirling in my mind. The more I thought about it, the more it felt like the entire weight of Ethan's future rested solely on my shoulders. In the midst of all this, I kept reminding myself of one thing: I had done everything I could. I had fought for Ethan with every ounce of strength I had, and I had told the truth. The truth was all I could hold on to now. It was Friday afternoon when the call finally came. I had just finished packing Ethan's lunch when my phone rang. I recognized the number. It was Jessica. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves before I answered. "Sarah," Jessica's voice came through, calm but laced with tension. "The judge has made her decision." My heart dropped into my stomach. What did she decide? There was a brief pause, as if Jessica herself was gathering her thoughts. Then she spoke, her voice steady. "Sarah, the judge ruled in your favor. You have full custody of Ethan." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The world seemed to stop moving around me. My knees buckled, and I collapsed into the nearest chair, my hand gripping the armrest for support. I felt lightheaded, disoriented. I had prepared myself for this moment, but hearing the words out loud felt like a dream. A part of me couldn't believe it, couldn't believe that after everything, I had won. I wanted to scream, to laugh, to cry all at once. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there in stunned silence, the magnitude of the decision sinking in. "Are you there?" Jessica asked softly, her voice cutting through my haze of shock. "Yes," I managed to say, my voice shaky. "Yes, I'm here. I can't believe it. I won. We won." Jessica let out a breath of relief. "You did. This is what Ethan needed. And you're the one who's always been there for him. I'm so proud of you, Sarah." I closed my eyes, allowing the rush of emotions to flood through me. I wasn't just relieved, I was overwhelmed by a deep sense of gratitude and love for my son. I had fought so hard for him, and it had paid off. We had made it through the storm. When I hung up with Jessica, I sat in that chair for several minutes, simply processing what had just happened. The weight of it all, the endless hours of worry, the stress, the fear, the doubt, had finally been lifted. But it wasn't just the legal victory that had me feeling like I could breathe again. It was the knowledge that Ethan would be with me. That he wouldn't have to face a future filled with uncertainty, torn between two homes that didn't feel like his. I stood up slowly and walked over to the living room, where Ethan was playing with his Legos on the floor. He looked up at me, his face bright and innocent. For a moment, I just watched him, taking in the sight of my son, the boy who had been my world for so many years. The boy who had been through so much, but who was now safe. "Ethan," I said softly, kneeling down beside him. "Can you come here, baby?" He paused what he was doing and walked over to me, his small hand finding mine. "Yeah, Mommy?" he asked, his voice sweet and trusting. I smiled at him, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "I have some good news." His face lit up with a smile. "What is it, Mommy?" I took a deep breath, my heart swelling with emotion. "The judge said that you're going to stay with me." "We're not going anywhere. We're going to be together, just like we've always been." Ethan's eyes widened, and for a moment, he didn't say anything. Then, his face broke into a grin, and he threw his arms around me, wrapping me in a tight hug. "Really?" he whispered, as if he couldn't believe it. "Really," I said, holding him close. "I'm never going to let you go, Ethan. Never." He pulled back slightly, his bright blue eyes sparkling with happiness. "We're going to stay together forever." I nodded, my eyes brimming with tears. "Forever, baby." The next few days passed in a blur of celebration. We went out for ice cream, we took a long walk through the park, and we spent time just being together, enjoying the peace that had finally settled in. The anxiety that had weighed so heavily on both of us started to lift, and for the first time in months, Ethan and I could truly relax. But even in the midst of our newfound calm, I couldn't help but remember what it had taken to get to this point. I remembered the long nights of fear, the anxiety, the countless hours spent preparing and worrying about what might happen. And I knew, deep down, that there were still battles ahead, there would always be challenges to face. But now, I had something even stronger than the fear and uncertainty. I had hope. And most importantly, I had Ethan. A week later, I received a letter from Ryan's lawyer. The contents were exactly what I expected. Ryan was upset with the decision and intended to file for an appeal. But this time, it didn't faze me. I wasn't afraid. Whatever came next, I knew I could handle it. I had already won the most important thing, the trust and love of my son. And that was all that mattered. A few weeks had passed since the judge's decision, and life had slowly settled into a new rhythm. Ethan was thriving in ways I hadn't expected. His laughter, which had been so rare during the months of the custody battle, now filled the house. He was back to his playful self, and I could finally see that weight lifting off his shoulders. We spent our days together, making breakfast, going to the park, and enjoying simple moments that I had once taken for granted. Evenings were spent snuggled up on the couch, watching movies or reading bedtime stories. I tried to savor every moment, to remind myself that this was what I had fought for. This was what I would always fight for. But as much as I tried to push the legal battle out of my mind, it lingered. I had received Ryan's lawyer's letter about an appeal just days after the ruling. The words were familiar, the legal jargon a cold reminder of how much I had to lose. Ryan wasn't done. He wasn't ready to let go. And I knew that meant one thing: this fight wasn't over. The morning after I received the letter, I woke up early, my stomach churning with dread. I made breakfast for Ethan, but my mind was elsewhere. I thought about the possibility of Ryan taking this all the way to a higher court. I thought about the time, the stress, and the emotional toll this would take on Ethan. Would he ever truly feel at peace? Would he always be caught in this tug-of-war? "Mommy, why are you so quiet?" Ethan's voice broke through my thoughts. I turned to find him standing in the doorway of the kitchen, holding his stuffed bear. I smiled and set down the spatula I had been holding. "Oh, I'm just thinking, baby. Everything's fine." He squinted up at me, still not entirely convinced. "Are you sure? You don't look fine." I crouched down to his level and brushed a lock of hair from his forehead. "I'm just tired, sweetie. But don't worry, okay? I'm not sad. I'm just trying to figure something out." Ethan nodded, his small brow furrowing in concern. "I like it when you're happy." I felt a pang in my chest. I liked it too. I wanted him to see me as strong and happy, and I would do everything in my power to make sure that's how he saw me. "I'm happy when you're happy, buddy," I said, hugging him tightly. "And that's all that matters." By the time the letter from Ryan's lawyer had arrived, I had already contacted Jessica. We spent hours discussing the options available to us. An appeal could drag things out for months, even longer. Ryan's persistence wasn't a surprise. He had always been determined to get his way, no matter the cost. But what was shocking was that he was willing to put Ethan through this again. The emotional toll would be immense. "We need to be prepared for this, Sarah," Jessica told me as we sat across from each other in her office. "An appeal is their right, but that doesn't mean it's going to work. We need to gather everything we can to prove that the decision was right. Ethan's well-being is at the forefront of this." I nodded, clenching my fists in frustration. "I just don't understand how he can keep doing this. Doesn't he care about Ethan's feelings at all?" Jessica sighed, her voice softening. "I know it's hard to understand, but sometimes people can be blinded by their own desires. It's not about what's best for Ethan to him, it's about winning. And that's exactly why we need to keep our focus on what's best for Ethan, no matter what." In the days that followed, we gathered every piece of evidence we could to show that the judge's ruling was the right one. We worked closely with Dr. Fields, who had conducted the evaluation on Ethan, and she agreed to testify again, reinforcing her findings. I also requested statements from Ethan's school and teachers, all of whom had witnessed the emotional strain he had been under throughout the custody battle. Despite everything we were doing to prepare for the appeal, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that gnawed at me. I knew the court system. I knew that nothing was ever guaranteed. The prospect of dragging Ethan through this nightmare again seemed like an insurmountable challenge. But I couldn't let him down. Not now. Not after everything he had been through. The day of the appeal hearing arrived, and I felt as though the weight of the world was pressing down on me. Ethan had stayed with Jessica for the day, and I couldn't bear to see him walk into the courthouse, his small frame caught in the crossfire of a war that wasn't his to fight. I kissed his forehead as he left, promising him everything would be okay. But even as I said those words, doubt lingered. Was it really going to be okay? Could the judge really see through Ryan's manipulation? The courtroom was even colder this time. The walls seemed to close in as I sat, waiting for the proceedings to begin. Jessica sat next to me, her presence a quiet strength I desperately needed. Ryan was there again with his lawyer, and though he sat across the room, I could feel his gaze. It was a cold, calculating look, the same one he had given me in every previous hearing. It made my blood run cold. The appeal hearing was long. Ryan's lawyer presented their arguments with practiced ease, but I could hear the desperation in their voice. They were fighting a losing battle, and they knew it. They made the same claims as before, asserting that I was unfit, that Ethan would be better off in Ryan's care. They even brought up my past, misinterpreting and exaggerating things in an attempt to make me look bad. But this time, I wasn't intimidated. I had already lived through the worst. I had faced Ryan's worst, and I had fought back. When it was our turn to present, Jessica and I stayed calm, presenting the evidence we had gathered, Dr. Field's testimony, the school reports, and the emotional toll Ethan had endured. We painted a clear picture of a child who needed stability, who needed his mother. I spoke again, my voice steady, my resolve unwavering. "I will never stop fighting for my son," I said, my words firm. "He's been through enough. The truth is simple, Ethan belongs with me. He always has." The judge listened, her face unreadable, as she took in the arguments. After a few hours of deliberation, she finally adjourned the hearing. We were told the decision would come in a few days, but for the first time in this entire battle, I felt cautiously optimistic. Ryan's appeal had failed to sway me, and I knew in my heart that the judge saw the truth. We had already been through so much, no amount of legal maneuvering could change the fact that Ethan and I belonged together. As I walked out of the courthouse that day, I held my head a little higher. The road ahead was still long, but with every step, I knew that I wasn't walking it alone. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The days that followed the appeal hearing felt like an endless loop of uncertainty. My mind remained restless, trapped in a constant cycle of what-ifs. I had felt the same way after the original court ruling, but this time, the stakes felt even higher. Ryan wasn't backing down. He was relentless, and his desire to win seemed stronger than ever. I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the battle wasn't truly over, that there was more to come. What if the judge overturned her original decision? What if the appeals court found in Ryan's favor? I had learned the hard way that nothing in this system was ever guaranteed. And now, I had to wait for the court's decision, wait for another possible twist in this never-ending drama. I spent my days keeping busy, trying to keep the pressure of the situation from crushing me. The last thing I wanted was for Ethan to sense how much this was affecting me. He deserved to be happy, to be a kid. So, every morning, we stuck to our routine. I made breakfast, got him ready for school, and took him to his activities. I smiled as much as I could, and tried to make every moment feel as normal as possible. Still, the tension between the two of us wasn't lost on Ethan. His observant eyes picked up on everything, even the smallest shifts in my mood. One evening, while I was reading him his favorite book before bed, he set the book down and looked up at me with a serious expression. "Mom," he said softly, "I can tell you're worried. You don't have to hide it. I know something's not right." I froze for a second, caught off guard by his insight. He was only 7, but his awareness seemed to grow every day. I placed the book down and turned to him, brushing his hair out of his eyes. "I'm just thinking, sweetie," I said, trying to sound as reassuring as possible. "But I promise you, everything will be okay. I'm going to make sure of that." Ethan didn't respond right away. He simply nodded, but I could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He was still a child, but he understood more than I wanted him to. "Mom?" he asked again, his voice small. "What if Daddy wins the next time? What if he says I have to live with him?" My heart twisted at the question. It was a fear I had hoped he wouldn't have to face, but I knew that deep down, it had been lingering in his mind. "No one is going to take you from me, Ethan," I said, my voice firm but soft. "I will always be here, no matter what." He snuggled closer to me, his small hand clutching mine. "Promise?" I kissed the top of his head, feeling my own tears threaten to spill. "I promise, baby. No one will ever take you away from me." Despite my reassurances, the uncertainty lingered. I couldn't stop thinking about what might come next. Every time my phone rang, my heart skipped a beat, and every time I checked the mail, I dreaded what I might find. Was it the court's decision? A letter from Ryan's lawyer? A reminder that this nightmare was far from over? It was a Wednesday afternoon, almost 2 weeks after the hearing, when the call came. My heart nearly stopped when I saw the number on my phone. It was Jessica. I had tried to stay calm. I had prepared myself for this moment, but nothing could have prepared me for the rush of emotions that overwhelmed me when I answered the phone. "Sarah," Jessica said, her voice carefully neutral, "the judge has made her decision." I felt my pulse race, my stomach flipping. I could hear the weight of the moment in her tone. This was it. Is it? My throat went dry, and I had to swallow before continuing. Is it final? What did she say? Jessica's pause felt like an eternity. Then, finally, she spoke. "The judge has ruled in your favor. The original decision stands. Ethan stays with you. The appeal has been denied." I exhaled sharply, as though I had been holding my breath for days. My body seemed to collapse in relief, the weight of it all lifting just a little. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but I felt a sense of lightness, a freedom I hadn't felt in so long. "Are you sure?" I asked, needing confirmation, unable to believe it. "Yes," Jessica said with a smile in her voice. "It's over. You've won, Sarah. The judge's decision is final." I hung up the phone slowly, staring at it for a moment, trying to process the news. For weeks, I had been trapped in a state of suspended animation, constantly waiting for the next bombshell to drop. But now it was over. The battle had been won. Ethan would stay with me. It felt like a dream. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The relief that washed over me was overwhelming, but it was also bittersweet. It was finally finished, but the scars of the battle would remain with both of us. I had fought for him with everything I had. And in the end, I had won. But it had come at a cost. When Ethan came home from school that day, I met him at the door with a wide smile. "Mom, what's wrong?" he asked, his brow furrowing with concern. "Why are you so happy?" I pulled him into a tight hug, my heart swelling with love. "Guess what, buddy? We did it. The judge said you're staying with me. No more worrying, no more court." Ethan blinked, unsure if he had heard me right. "I'm staying with you." "Yes," I said, pulling back to look into his eyes. "You're staying with me. Forever." He grinned from ear to ear, his eyes lighting up. "Yay. I knew it. I knew I'd be with you." As the days passed, I began to feel the full weight of what had happened. I had won. Ethan was staying with me. But what had this battle really cost? And what would the future look like now? Would Ryan ever truly walk away from his desire to have control over Ethan's life? Would he be able to accept the decision and move on? I didn't know the answers to those questions, but for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid. Whatever came next, I would face it head-on. I had already fought the hardest battle of my life, and now I knew that no matter what, I would always fight for Ethan. And that was all that mattered. The morning after the appeal was denied, I woke up to sunlight pouring through the blinds, bright, warm, and unfamiliar. It was the kind of morning that felt like a clean slate. There were no court dates looming on my calendar, no last-minute document prep, no dread in the pit of my stomach. Just quiet. Just peace. Ethan was still asleep, curled up in his blanket, his teddy bear tucked under his chin. I stood by his door for a long time, just watching him breathe. The past few months had changed both of us. He wasn't the same boy who used to flinch when the doorbell rang, and I wasn't the same mother who second-guessed every move. We had made it through the storm, but I could still feel the aftershocks. I knew better than to expect everything to go back to normal overnight. But that morning, for the first time in a long while, I believed normal might still be possible. Later that day, I packed us a picnic and took Ethan to the park, the same park where I used to take him before everything fell apart. We sat under the same old oak tree, the one near the edge of the lake, where the ducks still floated by without a care in the world. "Do you remember this place?" I asked him as he unwrapped his sandwich. He nodded and smiled. "This is where I fell in the mud." I laughed. "You were 3. You were chasing a squirrel and ended up face first in a puddle. He grinned, his mouth full of peanut butter. That squirrel was fast. We sat in silence for a few minutes after that, just watching the water shimmer in the afternoon sun. It was peaceful, so peaceful it almost felt like another life. Then Ethan turned to me, his voice quiet. Is Daddy mad that I don't live with him? The question hit like a punch. I put down my sandwich and looked at him carefully. He wasn't crying. He wasn't even frowning. He just wanted to know. I think Daddy's hurt, I said slowly. And sometimes when people are hurt, they act angry. But what happened wasn't your fault, Ethan. You were really brave. You told the truth. That letter you wrote helped the judge understand what you were feeling, and that's really important. He looked down at his hands. I just didn't want to lie. You didn't, I said, reaching out and holding his hand. And because of that, we're here. Together. Over the next few weeks, we found a new rhythm, something gentler, less reactive. I started taking yoga classes again. Ethan joined a Saturday art program. We made pancakes on Sunday mornings and built Lego castles on rainy afternoons. But the truth is, healing isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just having enough mental space to stop flinching when your phone rings. Or not needing to check the mail in dread. It's walking through the grocery store without scanning every aisle for someone who might try to take your world away from you. Ethan still asked about Ryan sometimes. Occasionally at bedtime, or if he saw another kid with their dad. I never shut down his questions. I answered honestly, carefully, and always reminded him that he was loved, by both of us, in our own ways. What mattered most was that he felt safe again. One evening, while we were brushing our teeth, Ethan looked up at me in the mirror and said, "Mom, you smile more now." I paused, my toothbrush still in my mouth, and met his eyes. "Yeah," I said, my voice muffled. He nodded. "I like it." That moment stayed with me. Not the court victories, not the legal arguments, just that. My son noticing that I was okay. That we were okay. The irony was, I had spent so long preparing for battle, building defenses, gathering witnesses, bracing for war, that I had forgotten what peace actually looked like. And here it was. In small, beautiful pieces. I knew Ryan might never let go completely. He might pop back into our lives months, or even years, from now. But I also knew this, I wasn't the same scared, silenced woman he had tried to break. I had stood up, spoken out, and won the most important thing in my life. Ethan. And no matter what came next, no one could take that away. It had been nearly a month since the final ruling, and in many ways, life had found its rhythm again. I returned to work part-time, Ethan was excelling in school, and our days were filled with the kind of ordinary routines I once thought we might never get back to. There were breakfasts rushed before the school bell, mismatched socks in the laundry, spilled juice on homework, normal chaos, the kind I had longed for. But trauma has a funny way of leaving breadcrumbs behind. It started with a voicemail. One I nearly ignored. I was standing in the kitchen on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, scraping together ingredients for dinner, when my phone buzzed with a new voicemail notification. I didn't recognize the number, but something in my chest went tight the second I saw it. I hesitated, hands still wet from rinsing vegetables, before finally pressing play. "Hi, Sarah," came the voice, low, controlled, and unmistakably Ryan's. "I know the court made its decision. I want to talk. I want to see Ethan. I think we should put everything behind us and figure out a way to co-parent, for real this time." Then a pause. "I'm not giving up. But I don't want to fight either. Call me." Click. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the sink, the voice still echoing in my head. For a moment, I was right back in the courtroom. Right back in the middle of the manipulation and half-truths. Ryan had always been calculated, always good at dressing control in the language of reason. But something was different this time. There was no threat in his tone. No demands. Just, calm. I wanted to believe he meant it. But I also knew what false peace felt like, how abusers circle back, not because they've changed, but because they've lost control. That night, after Ethan went to bed, I sat on the couch, phone in hand, replaying the message. Over and over. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel helpless. I felt choice. I called Jessica the next morning. I got a voicemail from Ryan, I said, recounting it word for word. He says he wants to talk. To co-parent. Jessica let out a slow breath. He's testing boundaries. He lost in court. Now he's seeing if he can get access through another door, emotional guilt, reasonable requests. It's a tactic. I figured. But if he's asking for visitation outside the terms of the court order, don't engage without documentation. Everything goes through me. No casual meetups. No emotional conversations. Just the order. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. He's not seeing Ethan unless it's approved. Good, she said. And Sarah? You don't owe him anything. I swallowed hard. I know. A week passed. Then another voicemail. This time, he sounded different, more agitated. I know you're getting these. Why are you ignoring me? I'm still his father. You can't keep me out of his life forever. This isn't over. Click. And just like that, the mask slipped. Calm turned to blame. Guilt turned to anger. I forwarded the message to Jessica, who filed a formal note with the court. No need for dramatic retaliation. Just quiet, documented defense. We had learned our lesson. Everything in writing. Everything above board. But what I couldn't send to Jessica were the dreams that came after. In my sleep, I was back in the courtroom, clutching Ethan's hand as the judge read the ruling. Except this time, Ryan was smiling. Not defeated. Smiling. And I was silent, voiceless, unable to speak as he walked away with Ethan. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in the darkness. Even after victory, the fear still lingered. A few days later, Ethan came home from school unusually quiet. He pushed his food around at dinner and asked to go to bed early. Something was off. Hey, I said gently, sitting on the edge of his bed later that night. Rough day. He nodded, eyes lowered. Some kids were talking about dads today. I didn't say anything. I just felt weird. I didn't need details. I knew what that weird meant. The questions no 7-year-old should have to answer. Where's your dad? Why doesn't he pick you up? Does he live far away? I know it's hard, I said quietly. And it's okay to feel weird. But you can talk to me. You can ask anything. Ethan looked at me for a long moment, then asked, do I have to see him again? It wasn't the first time he'd asked, but this time it cut deeper. Because now I knew, he remembered the confusion. The anxiety. The tug of war. And even at 7, he knew that his peace was fragile. No, I said, clear and certain. Not unless a judge says it's right for you. And even then, you and I, will talk about it together. You get a say. His shoulders relaxed. Okay. And just like that, he rolled over, hugged his bear, and went to sleep. But I didn't. I sat in the living room that night, sipping tea, staring at my phone. Another voicemail had come through. This one. I deleted it without listening. For the first time, I didn't care what Ryan had to say. We were done answering to ghosts. The morning of the school assembly was crisp, the kind of early spring day where the air still held a trace of winter but the sun made promises. Ethan had been buzzing about it all week. His class was performing a song, something about kindness and courage, and he had a solo part, a short line he practiced every night in the mirror with unshakable pride. It felt like a full-circle moment. A stage, a spotlight, and a boy who had once carried the weight of a custody war on his small shoulders, now simply singing about being brave. We arrived at the school early. Ethan, in his little blue button-up and khakis, looked like he had aged a year overnight. He held my hand tightly, but I could tell he didn't need to. Not anymore. He just liked that it was there. "Do you think it's okay if I mess up a little?" he asked as we walked in. I smiled and leaned down. "You won't. But even if you did, I'd still be the proudest mom in that gym." He beamed, then ran off to join his class. I found a seat toward the middle of the bleachers. The place was filling up, parents with coffee cups, teachers herding excited kids, siblings trying not to look too bored. It was the kind of ordinary, chaotic joy I had craved for so long. And then I saw him. Ryan. Standing near the back, just inside the gym doors. My stomach dropped. For a split second, I thought I might be imagining it. Maybe it was someone who looked like him. Maybe my nerves were playing tricks on me. But no. It was him. He wasn't supposed to be here. We had no open visitation agreement. No approved events. He wasn't on Ethan's school contact list. He wasn't even supposed to be within a certain distance without written notice, per the protective terms Jessica had filed after the threatening voicemails. And yet, here he was. Standing in plain sight. Not causing a scene. Not storming the stage. Just watching. Like he belonged. I pulled out my phone, hands trembling, and texted Jessica immediately. "Sarah, Ryan is at the school. The assembly. What do I do?" The reply came almost instantly. "Jessica, do not approach him. Notify school security or administration. Take a photo from a distance if you can. I'll start filing the emergency violation report now." My heart was racing. This was supposed to be Ethan's day. Not another legal landmine. Not another twist in a story we had already closed. I looked toward the stage. Ethan was lined up with his class, completely unaware. Happy. Safe. That's what I needed to protect. I stood, walked briskly to the side of the gym, and found the assistant principal. I explained who I was, showed the court document on my phone, and pointed discreetly to Ryan's location. The reaction was immediate. Within minutes, 2 staff members approached him calmly, quietly. I watched as he shook his head, gestured vaguely toward the stage, then finally, reluctantly, walked out the side exit. No shouting. No drama. Just gone. But I knew better. Ryan never did anything without intention. I returned to my seat just in time to see Ethan's class take the stage. He stood in the front row, scanning the bleachers for me. The moment his eyes landed on mine, he smiled and gave the tiniest wave. And then he sang. His solo was short, just one line. "Even when it's scary, I'll still stand tall." But I swear it echoed. After the show, Ethan ran to me, eyes wide. "Did I do okay?" "You did more than okay," I said, kneeling to hug him. "You were amazing." He looked so proud, so full of life. I debated whether to tell him about Ryan's appearance. I didn't want to tarnish the joy of the day, but I also didn't want secrets to creep back in. Not between us. So, on the ride home, I told him the truth. "Your dad came to the assembly," I said, keeping my tone calm. "But he wasn't supposed to. I made sure the school asked him to leave." Ethan didn't react right away. He just stared out the window, thoughtful. "Did he try to talk to me?" he finally asked. "No," I said. "He didn't get the chance. And he won't. Not unless a judge says it's safe." I promise. Ethan nodded slowly. I think I'm glad he didn't stay. Yeah. Yeah. It was my day. That night, I sat at my desk while Ethan slept, going over Jessica's report and preparing a new statement for court. We weren't done. Ryan wasn't done. But this time, the lines were clearer. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was prepared. And Ethan? He wasn't a scared little boy caught in the crossfire anymore. He was the kid who stood on a stage and said, out loud, even when it's scary, I'll still stand tall. And I would stand right beside him. Always. 3 days after the school assembly, I sat across from Jessica in her office, a fresh stack of paperwork between us. She flipped through the pages with her usual laser focus, her highlighter moving methodically. This, she said, circling a paragraph, is what we're submitting to the court. Violation of the protective order. Unapproved contact at a school function. It's enough to initiate a formal warning, and, if the judge sees fit, it may result in further restrictions or supervised visitation requirements. Her voice was calm, but beneath her professionalism, I could feel the shift. Ryan's appearance wasn't just a scare tactic. It was a calculated move. One designed to rattle the edges of the order, to test how far he could go before the system stopped him. He didn't speak to Ethan, I said. He didn't make a scene. He just showed up. Jessica looked up from the file. Exactly. That's the point. No outburst, no confrontation, just quiet intimidation. He wants to remind you he's still there. Still watching. I rubbed my temples. It's never really over, is it? She offered a small, knowing smile. No. But it gets easier when you stop reacting the way he expects you to. Back home, I told Ethan I'd be late picking him up the next few days. I didn't want to tell him I had more legal meetings. I didn't want the phrase, court violation, to creep into his vocabulary. Instead, I focused on protecting the cocoon we'd built, our bubble of routines, bedtime stories, and pancake Sundays. It had taken so long to feel like life again, and I'd be damned if I let Ryan unravel it with a single appearance. But just as we began to settle again, another envelope arrived. This time, it wasn't from Ryan. It was from the court. I opened it at the kitchen table, Ethan upstairs humming to himself while building a Lego spaceship. The contents were short, sterile, and direct. Request for mediation filed, respondent, Sarah Conway. Petitioner, Ryan Delaney. Issue, re-establishment of parental visitation rights. I stared at the words. He was trying again. Not through the courts this time, but through mediation. A tactic that sounded civil on paper but carried a very different weight in context. Ryan was trying to corner me in a room, under the guise of compromise. Jessica called it immediately, he's hoping you'll slip. That he can present himself as reasonable while painting you as uncooperative. I don't want to sit across from him ever again, I said, pacing the living room. You don't have to, she assured me. You have the right to request third-party mediation or deny mediation entirely given the existing order. But be prepared. This is likely the beginning of another push. I looked up the staircase, where Ethan had begun calling my name. Mom. My spaceship broke. Come help me. My heart clenched. I wanted to run upstairs, scoop him up, and tell him that nothing would break again. That I had built walls around us stronger than any court order. But the truth? I felt the cracks already forming. I showed up at the mediation office 2 weeks later, alone. Jessica had arranged for representation to appear on my behalf after reviewing Ryan's filing. I wouldn't have to face him, but just being in the building was enough to churn my stomach. Outside the glass conference room, I caught a glimpse of Ryan. His hair was shorter, his suit more expensive, but his eyes were exactly the same, cold, calculating, performative. He looked like someone preparing for a performance, not a parent fighting for his child. Jessica later filled me in on how it played out. He spoke calmly, referred to Ethan as our son repeatedly, and insisted that he was simply seeking balance. He claimed you were deliberately alienating him. When asked to provide examples of your so-called interference, he cited your refusal to return his calls and your lack of updates. I laughed bitterly. So, not giving in to harassment counts as interference now? Jessica nodded grimly. He's banking on the mediator's lack of context. He wants to sound like a victim of a vindictive mother, rather than the man who left threatening voicemails and violated a court order. I sat back in my chair, the weight of it all settling in again. Does this ever get easier? No, she said quietly. But you get stronger. That night, I tucked Ethan into bed and lay beside him a few minutes longer than usual. Mom, he whispered. Yeah, sweetie. Why do grown-ups fight so much? I didn't answer right away. I think sometimes grown-ups forget what matters, I finally said. They get caught up in being right instead of doing what's right. He nodded, satisfied with the answer in that way only kids can be, and turned over to sleep. I watched him for a long time, my fingers tracing the edge of his blanket, as the echo of Ryan's tactics played through my head. Mediation. Legal loopholes. Emotional pressure. But Ethan didn't need to know any of that. Not yet. He just needed to sleep peacefully. And I would make sure he always could. It was Jessica who first recommended therapy. Not for me, though, God knew I probably needed it, but for Ethan. You've done an incredible job keeping him safe, she said during a quiet phone call late one Friday afternoon. But the trauma? It still lives in his body. Sometimes kids carry it quietly until they explode later. She wasn't wrong. Ethan had been having more nightmares lately. Some nights he'd wake up screaming, confused and disoriented, asking me if someone was trying to take him away. Other nights, he'd just sleepwalk, roaming the hallway until I found him. And though his days were mostly bright and joyful, there were flashes, moments of anxiety, sudden silences when certain names were mentioned. So I made the call. We met Dr. Rebecca Nolan on a sunny Wednesday morning. Her office was warm and welcoming, with oversized pillows, stuffed animals on every chair, and bookshelves lined with colorful stories about feelings and bravery. She greeted Ethan like she'd known him forever and gave me a smile that said, "You're not alone." I sat outside during the first session, listening to the distant hum of their conversation, catching little bursts of laughter. I didn't expect that. I didn't expect my child, who had been through so much, to smile in a stranger's office just 30 minutes after meeting her. When they finished, Dr. Nolan invited me in for a brief check-in. He's incredibly resilient, she said, closing her notebook. But he's holding on to some big fears. About you. About being taken. About being believed. I nodded slowly. He asked me the other night if I'd always find him, even if someone tried to hide him. Rebecca gave a gentle smile. That kind of question doesn't come from nowhere. But the good news? He trusts you. He sees you as his constant. I swallowed the knot in my throat. What can I do to help him let go of the rest? Keep showing up. Keep listening. And maybe, she hesitated slightly, consider coming in for your own session sometime. We could work on ways to talk about these things without reopening wounds, for both of you. I agreed without hesitation. Because the truth was, the wounds were already open. I was just really good at hiding the bleeding. Over the next few weeks, Ethan's mood began to shift. He was sleeping more soundly. Drawing more pictures again, bright, hopeful ones with superheroes and blue skies. One morning, I found a note he'd taped to the fridge. It was a simple drawing, me and him, holding hands, under a giant sun. Above it, in shaky handwriting, he'd written, "Safe with Mom." I stared at it longer than I should have. Not because I was sad, but because I couldn't believe how far we'd come. And then, like clockwork, Ryan made another move. Jessica forwarded an email from his attorney. A formal petition to reopen visitation discussions, this time claiming emotional neglect due to Ethan's lack of contact with his father. He's trying to flip the script again, Jessica said, annoyed. Claiming Ethan's therapy is part of a campaign to erase him. I laughed bitterly. So now I'm neglecting Ethan by helping him heal from what Ryan caused. That's the gaslighting talking, she replied. We'll file a countermotion. Include statements from the therapist if necessary. But be prepared. If this goes to court again, he'll try to weaponize your every decision. Let him try, I said, more steel in my voice than I expected. I'm done playing defense. At Ethan's next therapy appointment, I asked Dr. Nolan how much of this I should share with him, how much he had a right to know. She thought for a long moment before answering. Children are intuitive. He knows more than you think. But what he needs most isn't all the details, it's the promise that his truth matters. That what he says, what he feels, won't be dismissed. That night, as I tucked Ethan into bed, I sat beside him a little longer. Hey, I said gently, can I ask you something? Sure, he mumbled, halfway under his covers. Do you ever worry I won't listen to you? He blinked up at me, confused. No. Why? I shrugged. I just want to make sure. Because your voice matters, okay? Always. If something scares you, or confuses you, or makes you sad, I'll listen. Every time. He reached over and hugged me around the neck. I know, Mom. You always listen. That's why you're my favorite. I stayed there for a long time after he fell asleep, his arms still loosely around my neck, as if holding on to something he didn't want to lose. And maybe I was doing the same. Ryan could keep filing paperwork. He could twist words, spin stories, and try to reclaim control. But he could never undo this, a boy, sleeping peacefully, in a home where he was finally allowed to just be a kid. It was the kind of rainy Sunday that invited nothing but staying inside. The windows fogged with warmth, the smell of cinnamon toast in the air, and Ethan's soft humming drifting from the dining table, where he was working on what he called his very important project. He hadn't told me much, just that it was for school, and that he didn't want me to peek until it was done. Normally, I might have pressed. But there was something different about the way he said it. Focused. Serious. Like this was more than a drawing or a story for class. He wrote for nearly an hour, pausing only to ask how to spell certain words, always scribbling quickly after. I didn't think much of it at first. Until I found the envelope the next morning. It was propped against my coffee mug on the counter, addressed in Ethan's careful print. To the judge. From Ethan. I stared at it for a moment, not knowing whether to open it or cry. A chill ran through me, not fear, exactly, but the heaviness of knowing that he had something to say, and he didn't want to say it out loud. I opened it. What I found inside stopped me cold. Dear Judge. My name is Ethan. I am 7 years old. I know I am just a kid, but I want to say some things. I don't like going back and forth all the time. I don't like being scared or confused. I love my dad, but I don't like how I feel when I'm with him. I feel nervous. I feel like I can't say things without him getting mad. Sometimes he says things about my mom that make me sad. My mom never says bad stuff about him. She just lets me talk. I want to stay with my mom. I want to sleep in the same bed every night. I want to go to the same school and play with my friends. I want to feel safe all the time, not just some of the time. My mom listens to me. She lets me draw and sing and be silly. She helps me when I have bad dreams and takes me to Dr. Rebecca, who is helping me feel less afraid. I don't want to stop feeling better. Please listen to me, even if I am a kid. I know how I feel. I know what makes me happy. Thank you, Ethan. I must have read it 10 times before I could breathe. This wasn't just a letter. It was a lifeline. A voice that had fought through months of chaos to finally speak clearly, unfiltered, with all the honesty only a child could bring. I called Jessica immediately. "There's something you need to see," I said, my voice shaking as I held the letter in one hand. She drove over that afternoon. I handed her the envelope, still bearing Ethan's careful handwriting. She read it slowly, without interruption. When she finished, she looked at me with a mix of exhaustion and pride. "This," she said, holding the pages delicately, "this could change everything." The courts were notoriously hesitant to factor in a young child's direct voice. But in high-conflict custody cases, especially with evidence of emotional distress, letters like this carried power. Ethan's words weren't coached. They weren't dramatic or accusatory. They were real. They were raw. And they were his. The following week, Jessica submitted the letter as part of our formal response to Ryan's renewed visitation motion. She attached a written affidavit from Dr. Nolan, verifying that the letter was written independently, without influence, and reflected Ethan's recurring themes in therapy: fear, anxiety, and his strong desire to remain in one consistent, nurturing environment. I didn't know how Ryan would react. But when the court date arrived, I didn't care. Because for the first time, Ethan had spoken for himself. Not in a courtroom, not in front of strangers, but through his truth, written in his own shaky, beautiful handwriting. The hearing was quiet, procedural. Ryan didn't show up in person, his attorney did. They tried to argue that a 7-year-old couldn't possibly grasp the complexities of custody. Jessica responded by presenting Dr. Nolan's evaluation. Then she handed the judge Ethan's letter. No theatrics. No long speeches. Just the truth. The judge read it slowly. Then looked at me. "You've been through a great deal," she said, her voice neutral but kind. "So has your son. His letter, it carries more clarity and conviction than some of the statements I hear from adults. Thank you for allowing him the space to find his voice." She paused. "And thank him, for trusting us with it." When I told Ethan the judge had read his letter, he asked, "Did she believe me?" I smiled and hugged him tight. "She heard you, Ethan. Loud and clear." And maybe for the first time in this entire ordeal, I realized. So did I. The letter changed everything. For weeks after the court hearing, there was nothing. No new filings. No voicemails. No surprise appearances. It was like Ryan had vanished into the quiet. But silence can be deceptive. It was a Tuesday when the letter came, delivered not by the court, not by an attorney, but through certified mail. The envelope was thick, hand-addressed, and marked with Ryan's name. I hesitated before opening it, my stomach tightening the way it always did when something had his fingerprints on it. I braced myself for threats, accusations, more legal demands. Instead, it was a request. Plain and direct. "I'm asking for one supervised visit. Just one. I don't want to fight anymore. I want Ethan to know I care. If you agree, I'll stop all further action. No more court, no more pushing. One visit, in a neutral space, with professionals present." There was no signature beyond his printed name. No apology. No emotion. Just a simple plea and an offer of silence in exchange. I stared at the letter for a long time. Part of me wanted to rip it up. Another part. Perhaps the same exhausted part that had spent months in legal meetings, therapy waiting rooms, and anxiety, wanted it to be true. Wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was the final stretch. That Ryan had finally accepted the truth. But I knew better than to make decisions from a place of hope alone. I called Dr. Nolan first. Then Jessica. I won't advise you one way or the other, Jessica said, her tone measured, but I'll say this, supervised visitation is safe, legally, emotionally, physically. If he's telling the truth, it gives him a way to say goodbye. If he's not, we document everything and let him bury himself. Dr. Nolan had a similar take. If Ethan is prepared, and only if, this could give him closure. It must be on his terms. He must be allowed to leave at any time. The location must be neutral. And I would recommend a clinical observer present, not just a court monitor. I mulled it over for days. Not out of fear. Out of caution. Out of a desire to do right by Ethan, not to make peace with the past. Finally, I asked him. We were in the park, just after school. He was digging in the sand with a plastic shovel, dirt on his jeans and a juice box half finished by his side. I sat down next to him and said, gently, Ethan, your dad sent a letter. He wants to see you. Just once. With people there to make sure it's safe. He didn't say anything at first. Just kept digging. Finally, he asked, would you be there too? No, I said. But someone like Dr. Rebecca would be. Someone who would make sure it was okay the whole time. Another long pause. Then, can I leave if I don't want to stay? Absolutely. He nodded once. Then, softly, okay. Just once. The visit was scheduled for the following week at a child therapy center downtown. Neutral territory, stocked with games, cameras in every corner, and licensed family therapists trained to observe high-conflict situations. Ethan was calm the morning of. Not excited, not nervous, just quiet. A quiet I knew well. The kind where his thoughts were too big to say out loud. Dr. Nolan gave him a pep talk before walking him inside. I waited in the observation room, where everything was being recorded, but the volume was muted. From behind the glass, I watched the two of them sit in the playroom. Ryan looked thinner, more tired. He tried to smile. Ethan didn't return it, but he didn't look afraid either. They talked. They played a simple card game. Ethan said something, pointed to a drawing, then leaned back with his arms crossed. Ryan nodded. Said something back. His shoulders sagged. Then, unexpectedly, he stood up, walked to the therapist, and motioned toward the exit. 10 minutes early. The visit was over. Back in the car, Ethan climbed into the seat, buckled in, and looked out the window. I waited. I didn't want to ask. But after a few minutes, he turned to me and said, it was okay. Yeah. He said sorry. For everything. And then he said he wasn't gonna come back anymore. He said it wasn't good for me. That it was better this way. I held the steering wheel tighter. How did that make you feel? Ethan shrugged. Kinda sad. Kinda better. That night, he slept through without waking up. No bad dreams. No sleepwalking. Just silence. But this time, it felt like peace. A week later, Jessica called. Ryan officially withdrew his visitation motion, she said. He filed it himself. No attorney. One line, no further contact requested. I sat down at the kitchen table, unable to fully absorb it. It was over. Truly, legally, finally over. No more filings. No more letters. No more fear that he'd pop up again like a ghost in the background. Ethan had faced the storm and come through it standing. And Ryan, perhaps for the first time in his life, had done the one thing that finally showed he cared. He walked away. There's a strange kind of quiet that follows a long fight. It's not the kind of silence you get when you're alone in a room or when a conversation ends. It's deeper. Heavier. Like your body hasn't realized the war is over, so it keeps looking for the next battle. That's what the days felt like after Ryan officially withdrew. Peaceful on the surface, but my mind still woke up prepared for conflict. Still listening for footsteps that weren't coming. Still waiting for a door to slam, a voicemail to arrive, a legal notice to show up in the mail. But none came. Instead, what arrived was something unfamiliar: normalcy. Ethan was thriving. His grades went up. His drawings became brighter. He talked more. Asked more questions. Laughed louder. There were moments where I'd catch him staring off, especially when we passed certain places, like the old ice cream shop where Ryan used to meet us during the early days of joint custody. But even then, the look on Ethan's face wasn't fear. It was reflection. A kid processing his past, not being haunted by it. We spent more weekends outside. Parks, museums, even road trips to nowhere. I let him choose our destinations, no matter how silly or simple. One Saturday, we drove 2 hours just to visit a dinosaur exhibit he'd seen on TV. "This is what being free feels like," I joked as we stood next to a giant T-Rex model. Ethan looked up at me, serious. "No, this is what being safe feels like." He didn't say it with sadness. Just certainty. I started therapy myself. It took me a while to admit I needed it, that I'd spent so long surviving that I forgot how to settle. My therapist, Lauren, asked me in our second session, "When was the last time you trusted something without fear?" I didn't have an answer. So we started working on that, on what it meant to be safe and open. On how to build a life not rooted in defense. It was harder than I expected. But one night, after Ethan had fallen asleep on the couch during movie night, I found myself staring at him, not because I was worried or planning or waiting. Just looking. Just being. And for the first time in what felt like years, I felt still. At school, Ethan's teachers noticed a change too. "He's more engaged," his teacher told me during a parent-teacher meeting. "He's not just participating, he's leading. He's even helping other kids when they get anxious." I smiled, but inside, I wanted to cry. Not out of sadness, out of relief. Out of pride. Out of the simple, breathtaking realization that my son had made it through something no child should have to endure, and he hadn't just survived it. He had grown. One afternoon, Ethan came home with a permission slip for a Family Heroes essay contest. It asked kids to write about someone in their life who had helped them through a hard time. He handed it to me quietly and said, "Can I write about you?" My throat tightened. "Of course," I said. "You can write about anyone you want." A few days later, he showed me the draft. It was simple and short, just a few paragraphs. "My hero is my mom. She always listens to me. She made me feel safe when everything was scary. She believed me. Even when I couldn't explain things right, she knew what I meant. She gave me a home where I can sleep and laugh and not worry. That's what heroes do. They don't fight monsters with swords. They make sure you don't have to fight at all." I framed it. Not because I needed proof that I'd done something right, but because it was proof he had found the words. That his voice was no longer a secret tucked into courtrooms and letters. It was his own now. Strong. Clear. Free. At bedtime one night, as I tucked him in, he asked me something I didn't expect. "Do you think my dad misses me?" I paused. "I think he probably does." "Do you think he's sad?" "Maybe," I said. "Maybe he's sad for the things he didn't do right. But that's not your job to fix." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "I hope he's okay. But I don't want to see him again." "Is that bad?" I shook my head. "No. That's honest. And that's brave." He closed his eyes. "I like brave better than scared." "So do I," I whispered. I lay in bed that night and realized, I had waited so long for a court order, or a letter, or some official moment to tell me that the nightmare was over. But it wasn't the court that gave me closure. It was a quiet night in a safe home. A child sleeping soundly in a room filled with books and Legos and peace. It was a 7-year-old who had learned that his feelings mattered, and a mother who had finally allowed herself to believe it too. 3 months passed. No contact from Ryan. No new motions. No sudden appearances. It was like he had finally, truly disappeared. Like he'd finally done the one thing I never thought he could, let go. But trauma leaves its fingerprints. Even when you think you're free, the echoes linger. You hear his voice in unfamiliar phone calls. You tense up at the sight of envelopes you weren't expecting. You wonder if peace is just the part before the next storm. That's why, when I found Ethan sitting on the porch one afternoon with a pencil and a piece of paper, I didn't think much of it. Until I asked what he was doing. "I'm writing a letter," he said. "To who?" He hesitated. "Dad." I sat down beside him, letting the silence stretch. "Can I read it?" I asked gently. He shook his head. "Not yet." So I waited. That night, after he'd gone to bed, I found the letter folded neatly on the counter. No envelope. Just sitting there, like he wanted me to find it but didn't know how to say it out loud. I unfolded it carefully. "Dear Dad. I'm okay. I hope you are too. I don't really miss the old days, but I do remember some fun parts. Like the time we made pancakes and they burned and we laughed anyway. Or when we went to the lake and you let me drive the boat, even though Mom got mad. I used to feel scared a lot. Now I don't. That's not just because of Mom or Dr. Rebecca. It's because I learned how to talk about stuff. I learned that being afraid doesn't mean you're weak. And that sometimes, walking away is brave too. I don't think I want to see you again. But I hope you're okay. I really do. Love. Ethan." It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was closure, wrapped in honesty, written by a child who had been through more than most adults could handle, and still chose compassion over bitterness. I didn't ask him what he wanted to do with the letter. But the next morning, it was gone from the counter. And we never spoke of it again. In therapy, I shared the moment with Lauren. "Do you think he'll ever change his mind?" I asked. She tilted her head. "Maybe. Maybe not. The beauty of healing is that it gives us choice again. He's no longer reacting. He's deciding." That hit me harder than I expected. For so long, our lives had been a series of reactions, ducking and dodging, bracing and recovering. But now, Ethan was choosing who to be. What to say. What to keep, and what to let go. So was I. I began to declutter the house that weekend. Not just closets or drawers, but old energy. Photos. Keepsakes. Things I'd kept for too long because I thought they were part of Ethan's history. I found a box at the back of the hallway closet. Inside were old court documents, visitation schedules, and even a notebook I used to track Ryan's behavior, what he said, what he did, how he made me feel. I flipped through a few pages. Page after page of fear. I put the lid back on. And threw the whole thing away. It wasn't erasing the past. It was refusing to be chained to it. Ethan had already done it with a single letter he never mailed. Now it was my turn. One night, while reading in bed, Ethan looked up at me and said, "When I grow up, I want to be a helper. Like Dr. Rebecca. Someone who listens." "You'd be amazing at that," I said. "Why do you think you want to do that?" He shrugged, thoughtful. "Because I know what it feels like when no one listens. And I know how good it feels when someone finally does." My throat tightened. He looked back down at his book and started reading again like he hadn't just cracked my heart wide open. And I realized, again, just how incredible this kid really was. He wasn't just healing. He was becoming. The next day, I bought a new journal. Not to track trauma. Not to prepare for court. But to write about joy. Small wins. Growth. The first page, I wrote. He smiled in his sleep again last night. No nightmares. Just peace. And I left the rest blank. Because the story ahead was finally ours to write. It was a Saturday when I finally realized just how far we had come. We had spent the morning running errands, groceries, the dry cleaners, the usual Saturday rush. I hadn't expected it to be anything special. It was just another weekend. But as we walked down the aisles of the local farmer's market, I looked at Ethan, who was spinning around, his arms wide, his laughter ringing out across the crowd, and I felt it, the heaviness of peace. The kind that settles over you like a soft blanket when you least expect it. We were no longer running. No longer looking over our shoulders. No longer bracing for some hidden bomb to go off. We were just living. It had taken years to get here, years of fear, heartache, therapy, courtrooms, and impossible decisions. But in this moment, as I watched Ethan dive into a pile of pumpkins like they were the most exciting thing he'd ever seen, I could finally breathe without the weight of the past crushing me. We were free. That afternoon, as we sat on the front porch, Ethan holding up a pumpkin with a proud grin, I saw a car pull up across the street. It was a sedan I didn't recognize, the kind that looked like it belonged to a neighbor or a friend from church. A man stepped out of the car, looking around as though searching for something, or someone. My heart skipped a beat. It was Ryan. He didn't see me at first. His eyes were scanning the neighborhood, as though he were trying to piece together something familiar. I froze, my hand instinctively going to my chest, heart racing, ready to call out to Ethan, to shield him from whatever this might mean. But before I could stand, Ryan turned his head and locked eyes with me. We both just stared. No words. Just the space between us. A whole history. And then, almost as if he could feel it too, he gave a small, barely noticeable nod, before turning away and walking back to his car. He didn't look back. Mom. Ethan's voice broke through my thoughts. I turned to see him standing behind me, pumpkin in hand. His expression was innocent, curious, as always. He hadn't seen Ryan. He didn't know the weight of that moment. No more surprises, okay? I said with a smile, hoping to mask the mix of emotions swirling inside me. Yeah, he said, his face lighting up. I'm good with that. No surprises. That night, I sat on the edge of Ethan's bed as he drifted off to sleep. The sun had set, casting soft shadows in the room, and the peaceful hum of the house filled the space. I watched his chest rise and fall with each breath, the rhythmic sound of his slumber comforting, grounding. He was okay. He was so much more than okay. And for the first time in forever, I believed it too. The following week, I got a letter from Ryan. It was simple, no dramatic plea or final request. Just a few lines, handwritten in the same familiar script I hadn't seen in years. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I put you both through. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I am trying to be better. For what it's worth, I hope he's happy. I hope you are too. There were no expectations. No further demands. No conditions. Just an apology. I sat with the letter for a long time. I had expected something else. Maybe a threat. Maybe a request for more time. But what I got was simple, raw, and strangely, human. I didn't know what to do with it. It wasn't something that could be framed or kept. It wasn't something I needed to respond to. So, I folded it up, put it in the drawer, and closed it. Because, for once, I wasn't waiting for any more letters. A few days later, I had a conversation with Jessica. We were sitting at her office, going over the final steps for closing the case when I mentioned Ryan's letter. I don't know what to do with it, I admitted, twisting my fingers in my lap. She smiled gently. You don't have to do anything. You can keep it, or let it go. The past doesn't always come with a perfect conclusion. Sometimes, we have to write the ending ourselves. I thought about her words for a moment. Maybe that's all it had been, an ending that needed no grand gesture, no final confrontation. Just silence. Just space. Just moving forward. A few months passed. Ethan kept growing, kept changing, kept healing. His confidence continued to bloom, and I could see him becoming the person I always hoped he would be, strong, resilient, empathetic. He had his moments, of course. Moments of sadness, of confusion, of wanting to know why things had happened the way they did. But he never held on to them for long. His past had taught him that he could survive. But it was his future that he was learning to build. One day, out of nowhere, Ethan said something that stopped me cold. "Mom, when I grow up, I want to help people like you helped me." My chest tightened at the thought. It wasn't just about being a helper, he wanted to be like me. He wanted to do for others what I had done for him. That simple comment, coming from the mouth of a child who had learned so much more than most kids his age, filled me with an overwhelming sense of pride. "I think you'll be amazing at it," I said, my voice thick with emotion. Ethan smiled, and for a moment, I saw my own reflection in his eyes. The person I had become through all the chaos. The person who had finally learned how to embrace peace. We had learned to live again. To breathe without fear, to step forward without hesitation. And when I looked at Ethan, I realized that the greatest thing I had ever done was not protecting him from the world, but teaching him how to rise above it. It had been nearly a year since Ryan's last letter. A year of quiet. A year of growth. A year of understanding. The storm had passed. The dust had settled. And I was left standing in the light, beside my son, feeling the warmth of a new life taking root. But there was one more thing left to do. I woke up to the sound of rain tapping against the window. It was early, still dark outside, but my body was awake, as though it knew this day held some kind of significance. I lay there for a moment, just listening to the soft rhythm of the rain, and I realized that for the first time in a long time, I felt completely at peace. Not because everything was perfect. It wasn't. But because I had come to terms with what had happened. I had forgiven myself for the times I felt weak. I had forgiven Ryan for the mistakes he made, not for him, but for me. Because carrying resentment had only weighed me down. And now, I was free. When I walked into the kitchen, Ethan was already sitting at the table, eating his cereal. He looked up at me with a smile, his hair still messy from sleep, and I felt that familiar tug in my chest. The kind that comes from knowing how lucky you are to have a child who is so full of life, so full of hope. "Morning, Mom," he said. "Morning, sweetheart," I replied, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "How's the cereal?" "Good," he said, taking another bite. "Can we go to the park today? I want to ride my bike." I smiled. "Of course, we can." I didn't know how the day would unfold, but I knew it would be just like any other day, filled with simple moments of happiness. That was the beauty of it now, the ordinary had become extraordinary. Around noon, I received a call from Jessica. "Hey, I just wanted to check in," she said. "How are you feeling about everything? The final decree will be filed today. Ryan has officially withdrawn his request for full custody." I took a deep breath, the weight of it all settling on me again. But this time, it was different. This time, I didn't feel the need to celebrate, or to seek some kind of approval. I had already won. "I'm good," I said. "I'm actually okay with it now." Jessica's voice softened. "I'm glad to hear that. It's a long road, but I'm proud of how far you've come. Both of you." I glanced over at Ethan, who was finishing his cereal. He didn't know the full extent of the battle we'd fought, but he knew what mattered, he was safe. He was loved. And he was mine. Later that afternoon, Ethan and I went to the park. He rode his bike ahead of me, weaving in and out of the paths, laughing as the wind blew through his hair. I watched him, my heart swelling with pride, and for the first time, I felt completely grounded in the present. No past haunting me. No future to fear. Just this moment. This time with him. As he skidded to a stop beside me, breathless, he grinned. "This is the best day ever." I laughed, crouching down to his level. "You think so?" He nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah. I think every day is going to be the best day ever from now on." And in that moment, I believed him. As we sat on the grass afterward, eating ice cream, Ethan turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Mom," he said quietly. "Do you think Dad will ever change? I mean, really change?" I took a long pause, my fingers brushing against the cone in my hand. This question was inevitable. He was processing the last pieces of his story, and I knew it would come up eventually. "I think people can change, but it's not up to us to wait for them," I said. "We can only control what we do, how we choose to move forward. And we've both done a lot of moving forward." He thought about that for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly as he licked his ice cream. "Yeah, I guess you're right." We sat in silence for a while, just watching the world go by. Children playing in the distance, parents chatting on benches, the distant hum of city life. It all felt so normal. So right. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to fight. Later that night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, I sat down to write in my journal. I hadn't written anything in months. I hadn't needed to. But tonight, there was a quiet compulsion to put my thoughts into words. I wrote. Today felt like a new beginning. We didn't have to fight for it. We just stepped into it, together. The past doesn't define us anymore. It's behind us, and it will never have the power to hurt us again. I paused, looking out the window at the dark sky. The rain had stopped, and the world outside felt still. And then, I added. I am proud of who we've become. I am proud of how far we've come. And I'm proud of the life we are building. Ethan deserves that. I deserve that. And I will never stop fighting for us, together. I closed the journal and set it aside, standing to look at the photo on the mantel. The one of Ethan and me, taken on a day when everything felt uncertain. That photo now seemed like a relic of a time that no longer held power over us. A time when we were still finding our way. But now we had found it. As I turned off the light and climbed into bed, I realized that the weight I had carried for so long, the guilt, the fear, the doubt, was gone. It wasn't because Ryan had apologized, or because I had won some legal battle. It was because, in the end, I had learned the most important lesson of all. Healing doesn't require permission. It only requires courage. And we had that in abundance. Ethan and I had made it through. And now, we were truly free. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?